The Memoirs of Sergeant Bourgogne offer a personal account of his experiences during Napoleon's Russian campaign. He describes the harsh realities faced by the French soldiers, and these are his words. On re-entering the forest, we found it impossible to advance 20 yards. No human being could ever have set foot there. The trees were so crowded together, the brushwood was so thick, and there were so many fallen trunks half buried in the snow. We were forced to come out and run the risk of being seen by following the forest outside. Our poor horse sank at every step into the snow, and night was drawing on before we had gone half our distance. To rest for a few minutes, we entered a road leading into the forest. We dismounted and flew at once to our precious bottle. This was our 5th attack, and we could now see its contents diminishing. As there were a good many felled trees about, we decided to get as far to the other side of them as possible, and we halted against a pile of wood which would prove a shelter. After Picard had rid himself of his knapsack, and I of my saucepan, he said, "Now, for the main thing, a fire, quick, an old bit of linen." My old shirt was a wonderful thing for catching a blaze. I tore off a bit and gave it to Picard. He made it into a wick, and putting it with a bit of powder into the priming pan of his gun, he fired. The linen caught fire, but a terrible report was the consequence, repeated again and again by echoes, and I feared it would betray us. My poor friend Picard was not the same man since he had seen the prisoners and heard the officer's account of the Emperor's surrender. It had made a great effect on him. He even complained at times of a bad pain in his head, which was not at all the result of the Cossack's pistol. I cannot explain it. He forgot that he had loaded his musket, and after the report, he just sat still without speaking and finally only abused himself for a conscript and an old blockhead. Several dogs were set barking. Then he said he expected they would come and track us out like wolves. I tried to reassure him by saying that we need fear nothing at the late hour. We soon had a good fire, as we found some really dry wood. We also found, to our joy, some straw, probably hidden by peasants. Providence seemed to smile on us again, and Picard said, "Cheer up, Montpey. We are saved just for this night. God will do the rest tomorrow, and if we are lucky enough to find the Emperor, it will be all right." Picard, along with all the veterans who idolized the Emperor, thought that once with him, everything was bound to succeed and that in fact nothing was impossible. We made a comfortable litter for our horse with straw and gave him something to eat as well, all the time keeping him ready harnessed and with the portmanteau strapped on his back, ready for the first alarm. Picard took a piece of cooked meat from the saucepan to thaw it and said, "Do you know, I am thinking a great deal of what the Russian officer said." "What do you mean?" "Why, that the Emperor and the guard were taken prisoners. I know, of course, that it's not that. Couldn't possibly be. But I can't get it out of my wooden head. It sticks there. And I shall have no peace till I am with the regiment. Just now, let's eat and rest a little, and afterwards," he went on in Picardy patois, "we'll drink a tiot gut." The temperature was almost mild just then. We ate the horseflesh without much appetite, and Picard talked by himself, swearing all the time. I have 40 gold Napoleons in my belt, and 7 Russian gold pieces, not counting the 5-franc pieces. I would give the whole with all my heart to be with the regiment again. That reminds me, he said. The pieces are not in my belt, but are sewn inside my white service waistcoat, and as one never knows what may happen, they will belong to you. Well, I said, now for my last will and testament. I have 800 francs in notes and in gold. You may dispose of it all. If it is God's will, I should die before finding the regiment. While warming myself, I put my hand mechanically into the little canvas bag I carried and found something hard, like a bit of cord, and as long as 2 fingers. On examining it, I found it was tobacco. What a discovery for poor Picard. When I gave it to him, he let fall a bit of meat he was eating and took a quid of tobacco instead, to wait with, he said, while he found his pipe. As it was hardly the time to search for it, he contented himself with his quid, and I with a little cigar which I made à l'espagnol with a piece of paper. We had been resting for about 2 hours, and it was not yet 7 o'clock. We had therefore 11 or 12 hours yet to wait before continuing our march. Picard had been walking a few yards off for a moment, and I was getting uneasy about him when I heard a rustling in the brushwood in the opposite direction from that he had taken. I took my musket and put myself ready when Picard appeared. "It is all right. Montpey is quite right," he said in a mysterious voice, signing to me to keep silence. Then he told me that 2 women had just passed along the road, one carrying a bundle and the other a pail. They had stopped to rest for a few minutes, chattering like magpies. "We will follow them," he said. "Probably we shall come to a village or some hut where we shall get shelter and greater safety than here, for listen to those confounded dogs barking." "But," I said, "we shall be sure to find Russians." He said we would risk that. So we set off again in the night, in the midst of a forest, not knowing where we were going and with only a few footmarks in the snow to guide us. The footsteps ceased suddenly, and when we found them again, they turned off to the right. This put us out, as they led us away from the high road. Very often, too, we almost lost sight of them, and Picard had frequently to go down on his knees and search for them with his hands. Picard led the horse by the bridle, and I followed, holding his tail. A little further on, we found 2 roads, both of them with footmarks, and we stopped, not knowing which to take. We thought of making the horse go first, and trusting to him to guide us. But at last, God took compassion on our misery. We heard a dog bark, and a little further on, we came to a fairly large building. Imagine the roof of one of our barns placed on the ground, and you will have an idea of the kind of building now before us. We walked round it 3 times before we could discover a door, hidden as it was by a thatched roof reaching down to the ground. Picard went under the roof and found a second door, at which he knocked gently. No one answered. He knocked again. Still no answer. Thinking the house was deserted, he was about to push open the door, when a feeble voice was heard. The door opened, and an old woman appeared, holding a piece of resinous wood lighted in her hand. At seeing Picard, she dropped the wood in terror and fled. My companion picked up the wood, still alight, and advanced some steps. I fastened the horse up near the door, and on going in, found Picard in a cloud of smoke. In his white cloak, with the light in his hand, he looked like a penitent. He broke the silence by the best greeting he could muster in Polish, and I repeated it after him. An old man heard us and came forward. When he saw Picard, he exclaimed, "Ah, Frenchman, that is well." He said it in Polish and repeated it in German. We told them that we were Frenchmen of Napoleon's Guard. At that name, the Pole bowed and would have kissed our feet. At the word French, repeated by the old woman, 2 younger women came out of a little recess and showed the greatest joy. Picard recognized them for the 2 women whose footsteps we had followed. After being with these good people for about 5 minutes, the heat of the cottage, to which I was so unaccustomed, nearly suffocated me. I retreated to the door, where I fell down unconscious. Picard ran to help me, but the old woman and one of her daughters had already lifted me up and placed me on a wooden stool. They relieved me of the saucepan and of my bearskin cloak, and made me lie down on a camp bed covered with skins. The women seemed very sorry for us, seeing our great misery, and especially for me, as I was so young and had suffered so much more than my comrade. My sufferings had made me so wretched that it was pitiful to see me. The old man had busied himself in bringing in our horse, and they did all they could for us. Picard remembered the gin in my pouch and made me swallow a little, and I began to feel much better. The old woman took off my boots for me. I had not had them off since Smolensk, that is to say, since November 10th. It was now the 23rd. One of the girls filled a great basin with warm water and, kneeling down, took my feet gently, one after the other, and washed them, pointing out that I had a wound in the right foot. It was an old chilblain of 1807 at the time of the Battle of Alo. I had not felt it since then, but now it opened again and I suffered cruelly from it. The other girl, who seemed to be the elder, performed the same office for Picard. He submitted calmly, but seemed embarrassed. I said he had had an inspiration from God when he thought of following the girl's footsteps. Yes, he said, but when I saw them in the forest, I never thought we should be received like this. I did not tell you, he continued, that my head ached like the devil, and I still feel it. I believe that dog of a Cossack's ball did more damage than I thought. We'll see. He untied the cord under his chin, which held the sheepskin ear coverings in their places. But hardly had he done this when the blood began to flow. Just look, he said, Under. But that's nothing. It's only a scratch. The bullet must have slipped down the side of my head. The Pole helped him off with his shoulder belt. He had almost forgotten how to take off that and his fur cap. He had slept in them for so long. The girl who had washed his feet washed his head too. Everyone gathered round to serve him. The poor fellow was so much touched by their care for him that great tears rolled down his face. Scissors were needed to cut his hair, and all at once I remembered the surgeon's little case which I had taken from the Cossack. We found everything we wanted there for dressing the wound. 2 pairs of scissors and several other surgical instruments with lint and bandages. After cutting the hair off, the old woman sucked the wound, which went deeper than we thought. Then we put on some lint, a bandage, and a handkerchief. We found the ball in the midst of some rags which filled his cap. It had gone right through the left wing of the Imperial Eagle on the front of the cap, to his great joy. He also found his pipe, a regular cottage, not 3 inches long, and he began to smoke it at once. When our feet were washed, they dried them with lambskins, which served afterwards as a carpet, and on my chilblain they put some ointment, assuring me it would soon make me all right. They gave me a bit to take away, in a piece of linen. This I put in the surgeon's case with all the instruments I had used for Picard. We already felt much better, and we thanked the Poles for all the care they had taken of us. They told us how grieved they were not to be able to do more. On a journey one must lodge one's enemies and wash their feet, how much more one's friends. Just then, the old woman screamed and ran out. Her great dog had run off with Picard's cap. They wanted to beat him, but we begged him off. I proposed to Picard that we should examine the portmanteau still on the horse's back, so we carried it near the stove. First we found 9 handkerchiefs embroidered in silk. Quick, said Picard. 2 each for our princesses, and 1 for the old mother, and the others we will keep. This was done immediately, to everyone's great satisfaction. Then we found 3 pairs of officers' epaulettes, 3 silver watches, 7 crosses of honor, 2 silver spoons, 2 dozen hussars' gilt buttons, 2 boxes of razors, 6 banknotes of 100 rubles each, and a pair of linen trousers stained with blood. I hoped to find a shirt, but was disappointed. I had greater need of that than of anything else, as the warmth had revived the vermin which devoured me. The girls opened their eyes wide as they looked at our presents, unable to believe they were really theirs. The gilt buttons gave them greater pleasure than anything else, and also some gold rings, which I enjoyed putting on their fingers. The girl who had washed my feet noticed, I am sure, that I gave her the best. Very likely the Cossacks cut off the dead man's fingers to take the rings. To the old man we gave a large English watch and 2 razors, besides all the Russian small money, amounting to more than 30 francs. We noticed that he fixed his eyes continually on a commander's cross with the emperor's portrait, so we also gave that to him. I cannot describe his pleasure. He pressed it several times to his lips and his heart, and finally fastened it round his neck by a leather band, making us understand that only death should part him from it. We asked for some bread, and they brought us what they had not dared give us before, they said. It was so bad, we really could not eat it. It was made of a black paste, full of grain of barley, rye, and bits of straw, rough enough to tear one's throat to pieces. They said this bread came from the Russians. The 3 leagues of the French had beaten them that very morning, and had taken a large convoy from them. This news had been brought to them by the Jews who were flying from all the villages on the road to Minsk. They had also sold them this bread, which was quite uneatable, and although I had not eaten any bread for more than a month, I could not manage to get my teeth into it. For a long time too, my lips had been so cracked by the frost that they bled constantly. When the peasants saw that we could not eat the bread, they brought us a piece of mutton, a few potatoes, some onions, and some pickled cucumber. They gave us, in fact, everything they had, saying that they would do their best to get us something better. We put the mutton into the saucepan to make some soup. The old man told us that half a league off there was a village filled with refugee Jews, and as they had carried off all their food with them, he hoped he could find there something better to eat than what they had set before us. We wished to give him some money, but he refused it, saying that what we had given him and his daughters would be quite sufficient, and that one of them had already gone off with her mother and the big dog. They had made a bed for us on the ground of straw and sheepskins. Picard had already gone to sleep, and I soon followed his example. We were awakened by the loud barking of the dog. "Good," said the Pole. "My wife and daughter have come back." They brought us some milk, a few potatoes, and a little cake of rye meal, which they had procured by heavy payment, but brandy, nima. The little there was had been taken by the Russians. We thanked these kind people, who had walked nearly 2 leagues, with the snow up to their knees, in the middle of the night too, in terrible cold, and exposed to the attacks of wolves and bears, which abound in Lithuanian forest. We made some milk soup and drank it at once. I felt much better after I had eaten, and then sat reflecting, my head in my hands. Picard asked me what I was thinking of. "I am thinking," I said, "that if I were not with you and bound by honor and my oath, I should stay here in this forest with these good people." "Cheer up," he said. "I have had a lucky dream. I dreamed I was in the barracks at Courbevoie, eating a piece of mare au bout pudding and drinking a bottle of Suresnes wine." While Picard was speaking, I noticed that his face was very red, and that he frequently put his hand to his forehead. I asked him if his head pained him. He said it did, but that was caused very likely by the heat, or by having slept too long, but he seemed to me to be in a fever. His vision of the barracks at Courbevoie confirmed me in this opinion. "I want to go on with my dream and try to find Mère Aubu's again," he said. "Good night." He was asleep in 2 minutes. I too tried to rest, but my sleep was constantly broken by the pains in my legs, the result of my continued overworking. The dog began to bark soon after Picard went to sleep. He aroused the people of the house, and the old man, who was seated on a bench near the stove, got up and seized a lance fastened to a long pine branch, his only means of defense. He ran to the door, followed by his wife, and I did the same, taking care not to wake Picard, and armed myself with my musket and bayonet. We heard someone trying the outer door, and in reply to the old man's question of who was there, a nasal voice answered, "Samuel!" The wife then told her husband that it was a Jew from the village. I resumed my place on hearing that a son of Israel was at the door, taking care to collect all our possessions around me, so little confidence had I in the newcomer. I slept for 2 hours when Picard awoke me to take my share of the mutton soup. He still complained of a bad pain in his head, saying he had dreamt of nothing but Paris and Courbevoie. And forgetting that he had already related his dream to me, told me that he had been dancing at the Barrière de Roule and had drunk with the grenadiers who were killed at the Battle of Eylau. As we sat down to eat, the Jew gave us a bottle of gin, which Picard took possession of at once. And speaking in German, he asked its history. When he tasted it, all the thanks the Jew got was the exclamation that it was not worth the devil. It was bad gin made from potato spirit. The idea came to me that we might make use of the Jew as a guide. We had quite enough with us to tempt his love of gain. Picard approved of my plan, and just as he was prepared to propose it, the horse raised himself, terrified, trying to break his tether, and the dog gave tongue, and at the same moment some wolves began howling at the door. Picard took his musket to chase them away, but our host warned him against this, on account of the Russians. He contented himself, therefore, by taking his sword in one hand, and in the other a piece of flaming pine. Then opening the door, he ran at the wolves and put them to flight. He came in again, saying that the air had done him good and that his headache had nearly gone. The wolves afterwards came back, but we took no notice of them. As I had expected, the Jew asked us if we had anything to sell or exchange. I said to Picard that now was the time for proposals, as we wanted to be put on our way to Borisov or to the first French outpost. I asked him how far we were from the Berezina, and he answered 9 leagues by the high road, but we made him understand that we wished to get there by a shorter route, and I proposed that he should guide us, if we could arrange it. We gave him the 3 pairs of epaulettes, and a banknote worth 100 rubles, so all the value of 500 francs. I made the conditions, however, that the epaulettes should be left in charge of our host, who would hand them over to him on his return, and that I would give him the banknote on arriving at our destination, that is, at the first French outpost. When he returned, the epaulettes would be given to him on presentation of a silk handkerchief, which I showed to the assembled company. The handkerchief was to be given to the younger daughter who had washed my feet, and the Jew agreed to give our host and hostess 25 rubles. The son of Israel accepted the conditions, observing, however, that he should be running a great many risks in thus leaving the high road. Our host said how sorry he felt that he was not 10 years younger, so that he might guide us for nothing and defend us also against any Russians who might come. Saying this, he shook his halberd. He gave the Jew a great many instructions as to the road, and he at last consented to guide us, after satisfying himself that everything we had given him was of full value. At 9 in the morning we started. It was November 24th. The Polish family stood on the highest piece of ground they could find, following us with their eyes, and waving to us with their hands. Our guide went first, leading our horse. Picard talked to himself, sometimes standing and going through the musket drill. All at once he stopped, and on turning round I saw him motionless, porting arms as if on parade. Suddenly he thundered out, "Vive l'Empereur!" I went up to him, and taking him by the arm, I said, "What is the matter with you, Picard?" Fearing that he had gone mad. "What?" he answered, as if only just awake. "Isn't the Emperor inspecting us?" I was distressed to hear him, and answering that it was not today but tomorrow, I took his arm and hurried him along to catch up with the Jew. Large tears were falling down his face. "What?" I said, "an old soldier crying." "Let me cry," he said, "it will do me good. I feel miserable, and if we don't get to the regiment tomorrow, it's all up with me." "Cheer up. We shall be there tomorrow, I hope. Or the next day at latest. How's this? You are taking on just like a woman." "That is so," he said. "I can't explain it. I was either sleeping or dreaming, but I am better now." "That's right, mon vieux. It's nothing. It has often happened to me before. But since you came, I have felt quite hopeful. As I talked, I saw our guide stop continually to listen. Suddenly, Picard threw himself full length in the snow and shouted in a commanding voice, "Silence!" "Now," I said to myself, "he's done with. My old comrade has gone mad. What will become of me?" I looked at him petrified. He then got up and shouted again, "Vive l'Empereur, the guns! Listen, we're saved." "What you mean?" I said. "Yes, listen," he went on. I listened and really heard the sound of distant guns. "Ah, now I can breathe again," he said. "The Emperor is not a prisoner, as that fool of an immigrant said yesterday. It had got regularly on my brain, and I should have died of rage and mortification. Now let us go in that direction, it's a safe guide." The Israelite assured us that the guns were in the direction of the Berezina, and my old comrade was so delighted that he began to sing. Half an hour later, we could not advance any further, so difficult had our march become. Our guide believed he had missed the way. We heard the booming of the guns continually. It might be about midday. All at once the sound of the gun ceased, the wind got up again, and the snow began falling in such quantities that we could not see each other, and the poor son of Israel gave up leading the horse. We advised him to mount the beast, which advice he took. I began to feel terribly tired and uneasy in my mind, but said nothing, while Picard swore like a madman, because he could not hear the guns, and at the wind, which prevented our hearing. The trees were now so close together that we could not possibly penetrate through them. Every moment something caught our feet, and we fell headlong on the ground, half buried in the snow. And after much painful walking, we found ourselves at the place we had left an hour before. We now stopped for a few minutes, drank some of the bad gin which the Jew had given us, and discussed our next move. We decided that we must return to the high road. I asked the guide if he could take us back to where we had spent the night, in the event of our not being able to find the road. He said he could, but that we must make landmarks where we passed. Picard accomplished this by blazing the young birches and pines as he went along. When we had gone about half a league, we came upon a cottage. It was only just in time, as my strength was now failing me. We decided to halt there for half an hour while we fed the horse, and ourselves also. By a stroke of luck, we found there a quantity of dry wood for burning, 2 benches made of rough wood, and 3 sheepskins. These we thought we would take away with us, in case we were obliged to spend the night in the forest. We warmed ourselves while we ate a piece of horse flesh. Our guide would not touch it, but drew from under his sheepskin cloak a wretched-looking cake of barley flour mixed with straw, which he begged us to share with him. He swore to us by his father Abraham that he had nothing with him but that and a few nuts. We therefore divided it into 4. The Jew took 2 parts, and we each had 1. We also drank a little of the bad gin. When I offered some to him, he refused, as he would not drink out of our cup. But he accepted some, poured into the hollow of his hand. Then he told us that the next hut was a good hour's walk off, so we resolved to set out at once for fear of being overtaken by the darkness. The road was so narrow that we had the greatest difficulty in getting along, but Samuel, our guide, had pluck and kept on assuring us that it would become wider farther on. As a finishing stroke to our misfortunes, the snow began to fall again heavily and completely hid the way from us. Our guide burst into tears, saying that he did not know where we were. We tried to retrace our steps, but this was worse, as the snow flew straight in our faces, and now the best thing we could do was to stand against a group of pine trees, waiting till it pleased God to stop the snowstorm. It lasted for more than half an hour longer. We were almost perished with cold. At times Picard swore, and then he would The Jew continually cried out, my God, my God." For my part, I said nothing, but my thoughts were gloomy, and had it not been for my bearskin and the rabbi's cap, which I wore under my shako, I should have yielded to the cold. As soon as the weather grew a little better, we tried to find our way, but a complete calm had followed the storm, so that we could not distinguish the north from the south. We were now completely lost. We walked on at random in great circles, continually coming back to the same place. Picard swore continually, but now it was at the Jew. However, after walking for some time, we found ourselves in an open space, about 400 yards in circumference, and we hoped to find a road here, but after wandering around it several times, we discovered nothing. We looked at each other, hoping for an idea from someone. My old comrade leant his musket against a tree, and looking all around him, he drew his sword from its sheath. Hardly had he done so, when the poor Jew, thinking he was going to be killed, set up a piercing shriek and, leaving the horse, prepared to fly. His strength, however, failed him, and he fell on his knees, imploring mercy of God and of us, quite needlessly, however, as Picard had only drawn his sword to cut down a small birch tree and consult it as to our direction. He looked fixedly at the part of the tree still in the ground and then said calmly, "That is the direction we must take. The bark on this side, which must be the north, is a little red and rotted, and the other side, that of the south, is white and perfect. Let us walk towards the south." We had no time to lose, as our greatest dread was that night should overtake us. We tried to beat out a path for ourselves, taking care not to lose the direction of our starting point. Just then the Jew who was in front of us uttered a cry, and we saw him stretched full length on the ground. He had fallen down in trying to drag the horse between two trees where there was not room to pass. The poor cognia could neither go forward nor back. We had to stop and disentangle the man from the horse. The burden the horse carried, as well as his harness, had been pressed backwards onto his hindquarters. I was much put out at this loss of time. I would willingly have left the horse behind, but at the end of half an hour's efforts, we discovered a fairly wide path, which the Jew recognized as being the continuation of the road we had lost. He knew the road by some beehives in the trees, too high, unfortunately, for us to reach. Picard looked at his watch and saw that it was nearly 4 o'clock, therefore we had no time to lose. We now found ourselves close to a frozen lake, known to our guide. We crossed it without difficulty, and, turning to the left, continued our journey. Very soon we saw 4 men, who stopped on seeing us. We naturally got on guard at once, but it was soon apparent that they were more frightened than we, and after consulting together, they came towards us, wishing us good day. They were 4 Jews, known to our guide, belonging to a village on the high road. As the village was occupied by the French army, they could not possibly remain there without dying of cold and hunger. The provisions were all gone, and not a single house was left for shelter, even for the Emperor. From them, we learned to our joy that the French army was only 2 leagues off. They advised us, however, to go no further that day, as we might easily miss the road. We could pass the night in the first hut we should come to, not far off. They left us, bidding us good night, and we fortunately soon found our resting place for the night. There was a quantity of straw and wood in the hut, and we immediately lit a good fire in an earthenware stove we found there. It would have taken too long to make soup, so we contented ourselves with a piece of roast meat, and then decided to watch, in turn, 2 hours at a time, with loaded weapons near us. That concludes the 14th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.